be receiving medicine, but it's not the medicine that's being tested on the treatment group. So then in the end, they compare those two and try and determine if whatever the treatment was, if it was good or not, or if it produced the right results. There needs to be, it needs to make sure that the way the treatment group and the control group were selected, it must be random. So that way there's no dispute on that part of the treatment or that part of the experiment. So then within that, you might say, well, since they don't know whether or not, because they're not told whether or not they're receiving the treatment or not. So if I always think about if I'm taking vitamins, if I was in a experimental group and I was the control and I thought that every day I was taking these new vitamins that made me more awake and alert, I think I would probably think that was actually happening. And so that's what the placebo is called. So it lacks the active ingredients of the treatment being tested, but it is identical in appearance to that treatment. So the participants can't distinguish the placebo from the real treatment. So the placebo itself is just saying that you can't tell a difference between me and what the real treatment is. And then next is the placebo effect, like I was referring to before. This is when you think you're getting better because you think you're receiving the right treatment. So, like I said earlier, if I think I'm taking a new vitamin to make me more awake in the morning, I may actually think that just because I think I'm getting that treatment. And it may not actually be happening. That's the placebo effect. So then within this, there's a thing called blinding. So it's kind of how people are kept in the dark about who's in the treatment group and who the control group is. So that's the blinding part, not telling who's in each group. So there is a single blind, and that's when the participants themselves, they don't know whether or not they're in the treatment group or the control group. But the experimenters do. So the behind-the-scenes people that are giving the treatment away, they know whether or not they're handing out a treatment or they're handing out the placebo. So they know whether or not they're doing that. The double blind is where neither the participants nor the experimenters know who is in the treatment group and who is in the control group. So it's called a double blind because it's not only the people receiving the treatment, but it's also the experimenters that are conducting the experiment. A case control study is an observational study that resembles an experiment because the sample naturally divides into two or more groups. So, for instance, and participants who engage in behavior under study form the cases. And the participants who do not engage in that behavior are called the controls. So, let me go back to this a minute. The case control study, that is, we would not want to conduct an experiment on whether or not alcohol consumption during pregnancy affects newborns. We would not want to create two different groups and say, okay, you pregnant moms, you go ahead and drink, and you other group over here, you pregnant moms, you don't drink. We would never want to encourage drinking while pregnant, and so therefore we wouldn't conduct that study. We wouldn't conduct that experiment. However, it does happen, right? Because some women do drink while they're pregnant. And so therefore, it becomes a case control study in which they naturally form the two groups. So naturally, when you come in, you're about to give birth, you could say whether or not you drank while you were pregnant or whether you did not drink while you were pregnant. This requires some honesty. And so therefore, this does create two separate groups. And the cases would be the people who engage in the behavior. So for instance, if someone drank while they were pregnant, they would be part of the case. And then the control would be the people who did not drink while they were pregnant. So case control studies are usually come about when it's something that you just would not conduct an experiment about. Not always, but in general. All right. For the experiment below, identify any problems and explain how that problem could have been avoided. So, a chiropractor performs adjustments on 25 patients with back pain. Afterwards, 18 of the patients say they feel better. He concludes that the adjustments are an effective treatment. So I want you to think for a minute, do you think that this was a good experiment, or describe the problems that you think there could be with it, and then how could that have been avoided? Alrighty. So the 25 patients who received the adjustment represent a treatment group. But that study lacks a control group, because the patients may be feeling better because of the placebo effect rather than the real adjustment of themselves. So the chiropractor might have improved his setting by hiring an actor to do fake adjustments, ones that feel like real manipulation but don't actually conform to the chiropractic guidelines. And he could do that on a control group and see whether or not at the end they felt as though their back was feeling better, or whether or not the placebo effect was involved. Alright, same thing for this one. For the experiment described below, identify any problems and explain how the problems could be avoided. So a new drug for a type of attention deficit disorder is supposed to make the affected children less disruptive. Randomly selected children suffering from the disorder are divided into treatment and control groups. Those in the control group receive a placebo that looks like the real drug. The experiment is single-blind. Experimenters interview the children one-on-one to decide whether or not they became more polite. So I want you to think about good experiment, bad experiment, and if it's a bad one, what are the problems with this, and then how could they have been avoided? I don't know if you can hear the thunder and lightning in the background, but it sure does create a nice little added statistical effect. Pretty exciting. Okay. Alright, so because the experimenters know which children received the drug, during the interview they could speak to the children differently, they could ask the questions a little differently, and so therefore they could kind of sway whether or not they felt as though they behaved more politely during the interview. So the experiment could have been double-blind. If it was double-blind, then both the experimenters and the children wouldn't have known, and so therefore in the end it would have been a more sound or a more reliable experiment. Alright, I'm going to stop it there, and we will come to the next video to start this up.